Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I'm talking about the new Disney reboot of Haunted Mansion. This is a adaptation of their Disney park attraction ride from both Disney World and Disneyland here in the US, and I'm sure it's at their other Disney theme parks all across the world as well. But in this movie, though, you guys, this has no continuation or no follow up at all to that Eddie Murphy movie from the early 2000s. So if you've never seen that movie, this has no connection to that movie at all. This is a completely start from scratch Haunted Mansion adaptation. And in this movie, basically, Rosario Dawson plays a mother of one son, and they move into a home that's in New Orleans. And right away, they figure out it's haunted. There's evil spirits that live in it. But what makes this house unique is every time they have a guest or a family member visit, or just somebody that enters the home in any way, shape, or form, something about the mansion kind of goes home with them, and it makes them want to go back to the mansion because there's something about that thing that followed them home that they want to have closure to or they want to get rid of. And because they know it came from that home that has the evil spirits in it, they always seem to come back to that house. So over the course of this movie, Rosario Dawson is basically housing a bunch of different people that have since entered the home since the beginning of the film. We have a priest from the church. There is a fortune teller that lives in New Orleans. There's a guy we kind of find a tragic backstory to that kind of had us who was dating someone that has loose connections to the haunted mansion. So there's a whole bunch of different people. Danny Devito plays another one of the characters as well. So a whole bunch of people basically are within this house. They're home together, and over the course of this movie, they find out about a ghost named the Hatbox Ghost, who's kind of the ghost in charge of all these evil spirits within this house, and he's played by Jared Leto. And over the course of this movie, they look into solutions of how to kind of rid of all these things that have since followed each and every one of them home since they have been inside the haunted mansion. How do they get rid of the Hatbox Ghost? How to make sure that the Hatbox Ghost doesn't convince you to do one of his plans that ultimately you'll regret in the end, and things like that. So over the course of this movie, they have to figure out what exactly they're going to do with all these evil spirits. What are they going to do with the Hatbox Ghost? How can they defeat the Hatbox Ghost if he's already dead? And there's several different things about the Haunted Mansion that these characters have to figure out over the course of this movie. But overall, guys, I liked this movie. I wouldn't say I loved this new Haunted Mansion movie. I didn't hate it either. I do think it's actually better than just okay. It's a decent enough movie. I am going to go over some positives and negatives of what I really liked about the movie, but why it's kind of not a film that I'm raving about. It's not the perfect Haunted Mansion movie we could ever possibly get. But so there's things about it that I'm definitely going to talk about of why I liked it, but ultimately some things of why there's things that I think could have been better about it, and why that best version, the best possible version of Haunted Mansion, has still yet to be turned into a movie. And I'll definitely go over that in my negatives here in a little bit too. So for my positives of this movie, the things I liked about it, why I'm ultimately probably going to give it like a slight modest recommendation about the movie, is there is some clever nods and references to the Disney ride. There's those black moving chairs that you enter and you sit down on while you're in the Haunted Mansion on the ride. That is definitely in this movie. There's definitely a nod to that at one point with Tiffany Haddish trying to talk to the spirits of the home. There's definitely a scene that's a clear night and day nod to that part of the ride. The whole thing with seeing a zombie in your seat, kind of a zombie or ghost sitting in the same seat as you when you're looking in a mirror, that's definitely a nod to the ride at one point. So they definitely use that, I think, probably 2 or 3 times throughout the movie, actually, for that. The whole thing with the dropping elevator, that's a part of the ride. They incorporate that into the movie as well, into one scene. So I thought that was also a very clever way to incorporate something that you know from the ride and put it into the movie. So there's a lot of things like that that they do in this movie that are clever nods and references to the Disney ride that make its way into this movie. I also like the idea of the mansion following the person home whenever you enter this house. And it always makes them come back to the Haunted Mansion. Because when I first saw this movie, when I first heard about it, I'm like, well, if Rosario Dawson and her son are really that creeped out by these evil spirits that live in the home, couldn't they just move out and just made a mistake, talk to their real estate agent and just find something else? But the movie has a way of kind of cementing that, the fact that they do have to kind of stay in this house. There is something about the Haunted Mansion itself that they kind of have to stay there, and with their scenario when they entered the home, as to why they kind of have to stay there, and these other people that we are introduced to throughout the movie kind of have to do the same thing. So I like how the film kind of incorporates that. It kind of encourages the characters to go back to the Haunted Mansion in some way, shape, or form. So there's certain aspects of the story where they find ways to do that. And I thought that aspect of the story was very clever. The whole thing of following you home, even if you're not in the Haunted Mansion. The film also has the child actor that's supposed to be Rosario Dawson's son in this movie. I thought the child actor they found to play her son, I thought was very, very good. His comedic timing was good. Just had a very likable presence. You understood kind of his tragic backstory when they go over kind of the tragedies of his life. Whoever they found for that child actor, I thought that was very, very well done. I highly hope to see this kid in future movies moving forward. Very good performance. I was just very, very impressed by this performance from this individual actor in particular, for sure. And overall, I really like the Hatbox Ghost character in general. I do like how this character tries to find ways to make you in the Haunted Mansion forever. He tries to strike a deal with you. He's not just the evil guy for the sake of being the evil guy. There's actually kind of a way to his madness in a way. He really kind of finds a way to be like, oh, okay, well, I really miss this person in my life, so if I join you, I'll get this person back in my life. He'll do stuff like that to really make you feel invited and encouraged to stay in the Haunted Mansion forever. So there's things like that that I thought were very well done. So the Hatbox character, the Hatbox Ghost character, I should say, played by Jared Leto, I thought was very well written in this movie for the most part. I also thought the film's in-universe mansion night rules were very clever. There's things like, they can't explore the mansion after midnight because that's when all the spirits are in full force, evil and good. There's certain aspects like, once you enter the house, no matter how long or how short you're in the house, there's something that probably is going to follow you home later that day. So there's just clever things like that where they establish rules. I do feel like they stick to the rules. You know how sometimes in movies they break the rules just for the sake of the plot. I really do feel for the most part they did stay within their rule book, within the universe of this Haunted Mansion, within the night rules of this place. And I thought overall they didn't break the rules. They really kind of stuck to the groundwork that they built earlier on in the movie. And overall, I think Disney's choice to make this a darker, more PG-13 tone, kind of like Pirates of the Caribbean when they made those movies, I think that works for Haunted Mansion. Now that I've seen a PG-13 version of Haunted Mansion, one that isn't too afraid to get too dark or a little scary at times, I think that is, if we do get the perfect Haunted Mansion movie at some point down the road, I think that is the way to go. So I think tone-wise, they found the tone for a Haunted Mansion movie. Obviously, some things in my negatives we're going to cover here in a second, but for the most part, the tone, the PG-13 rating, I think all that works for a Haunted Mansion movie. And now after seeing this movie, I think if they do try Haunted Mansion again, I think it's important that they stay within that realm. For my negatives of this movie, though, unfortunately, Haunted Mansion does not exceed at anything in particularly well. Yes, there's scares, but they're not great. Yes, there's humors, but they're not super memorable. Like, the jokes aren't really all that great. The drama's there, but it's not so memorable by the time the film's over with, you're going to remember about it. And yes, there's characters. Yes, they have tragic backstories. Your understanding of each and every character's situation. But for the most part, you kind of forget about the characters too by the time the film is over with. So it doesn't really exceed at anything in particularly very well. There is things that it does that are good, but there's nothing so great and life-changing about it that I think a rewrite would have helped this movie, because I felt like they were trying to do too much at once, and by making everybody happy, nobody's happy. It's one of those kind of scenarios. So I thought that aspect of the story was a little disappointing. I also thought the second act of the film really dragged. It really had no idea where to go until the third act of the film starts happening, with the Hatbox Ghost kind of in full force by then. I thought the second act really dragged. It had really kind of a difficult time of whether it wanted to be scary or humorous or dramatic or character driven. It really did kind of feel very draggy by the time you reach that second act of the movie. And also while watching this movie, I almost kind of felt too like there's so many subjects about loss and grief and stuff like that. I think some kids will understand that, but I think things like that, certain themes the films cover, that this film in particular covers, is a little too deep for kids. I just, as watching the movie, I was like, okay, that works for me as an adult. That's kind of understood how either myself or someone I know has gone through something like that. But there's times where there's themes where it's like, I think that's almost too deep for kids. And so there's times where it's just like, I really kind of wish Disney could have stepped in and be like, how can we make this more for families? Yes, it's PG-13. Yes, there's moments that are intended to be a little scary, I guess. But there is some moments here. It's like, I think that's almost too deep for kids. I also really didn't like how the story, whenever they were trying to go away from the haunted mansion and do stuff outside of the mansion, it really doesn't find all that greatest stuff to do. And I get it; it's haunted mansion, so I guess those scenes really have to count when you're inside the mansion in this movie. But whenever they do something outside the mansion, whenever they have to go somewhere or research something, the film just kind of has a hard time finding its way on those moments. So I thought that aspect of the story, once again, was pretty disappointing. I also thought there were some creative choices taken in Act 3 with Owen Wilson's character that I really can't get into too much detail here on, that really were once again kind of disappointing. I really thought it was a kind of a fun character at first, but there's something that happens in the third act that just kind of completely devalues the character for me. I get it. I understood why they did it. I'm sure they did it for humorous reasons, I'm sure, but there's some choices they do with his character near the third act that I thought was just kind of disappointing at the end. But overall, I'm going to give Haunted Mansion an 8 out of 10. I think it's a good movie. I think there's things about it that are well done. I think the best version of Haunted Mansion still has yet to be made into a movie. Obviously, the Eddie Murphy movie did not accomplish this. This movie did not accomplish it. There's just things about it, like it doesn't exceed at anything in particularly well. Act 2 really drags. I think there's certain moments that are going to be a little too deep for kids to get. It doesn't go away from the Haunted Mansion very well in the story. And there's just some creative choices taken throughout this movie, in particular with Owen Wilson near the end of the film, that just didn't really click for me all overall. So 8 out of 10 for me. Go into Haunted Mansion knowing that it's not perfect. If you really like the Disney ride, if you're intrigued by the Disney ride, I think you'll enjoy it enough. There is just enough here where I could modestly recommend it to you, but go into it knowing that it's not perfect, that there is going to be things about it that are probably going to disappoint you at the end. But for the most part, there is things about it that are good, that I liked, that I think if the best version of Haunted Mansion were to ever come out, I think certain aspects of this film are probably going to hopefully appear in that later version, hopefully. But there is just enough negatives here where I can't call it a great movie, and I can't absolutely recommend that you see it in theaters. If you wait till Redbox, that's perfectly fine for this movie. So 8 out of 10 for me, just enough to recommend it, but there's just enough problems here where I can't call Haunted Mansion a great film either. So good, just not great.